Uncle Doug.
Uncle Dan.
Whenever there's trouble, we're there on the double. There's a mystery about.
We're the heretic gang.
Yeah, exactly. Boy, our generation is loving
under
it.
40 are like, what the fuck are they talking about?
Everyone over 40 is like, oh my God.
Yeah,
remember
exactly.
that.
Yeah, we literally just caused an earworm that will echo through the ages for old guys.
Well, it's, and that's the part of the theme song to the Bloodhound Gang.
Right.
That did solve crimes, and this week we're going to talk about a crime.
Yeah, Uncle Mark's got a mystery for us. We should get Scooby and Shaggy out here.
Yeah, we got a little mystery machine. So last week I talked about a terrible event that took place 40 some years ago here in Salt Lake, where a number of children perished in a religiously fueled panic, but history barely remembers them and that day.
You're making me nervous now, Mark.
Well, believe me, this is sad, but not fucking nearly on that level.
Okay, good.
And it's got a really happy aspect too, which we'll get to.
Oh, hurrah!
So I was researching something else, which was one of 1,000 incidents of infamous Catholic shittiness, when I stumbled across a really obscure story of one child, and it caught my eye, which made me think of the movie Prometheus, when.
Okay.
When the android David quotes Lawrence of Arabia right before he introduces the xenomorph pathogen into his human shipmates' bloodstreams, where he says, "Big things have small beginnings."
You entirely lost me on that. I will admit.
Well, just stick with the big things have small beginnings. This is one of those strange moments in history. So,
got it.
Well, also the fact that there's a story that involves Catholicism and only one kid, that's amazing.
Yeah, it is. It was a simpler time. So here I paraphrase the author of the seminal work on the topic, David Kurtzer, who said, "This story of an illiterate servant girl, a grocer, and a little Jewish child from Bologna may have changed the course of both Italian and church history."
Huh.
So that's right. Today we will discuss how the Pope, legally kidnapping one child, brought the church to its knees and lost the Pope most of his gilded kingdom on earth.
What?
Yeah, I didn't know anything about this before. So you may not know that after the fall of Rome in 476 CE, what we now know as modern Italy did not just spring into being as a boot-shaped nation, unified under a common red, white, and green flag from hip to heel.
No, it was more of a strappy sandal, wasn't it?
No, it's a thigh boot for sure.
Oh, okay.
It's like a musketeer boot. Carefully watched over by no fewer than 61 governments of varying degrees of corruption since just World War II. No, sir. God. What is now the wonderful nation of Italy is quite a recent political reality.
Right.
It only took shape, something like its modern shape, in the late 19th century. When our story takes place around 1858, the peninsula and surrounds were a super weird patchwork of little kingdoms and duchies, one of which was called the Papal States. So as we discussed way back in episode 11, when we were talking about how the Vatican came to be a wee tiny country in just 1929, we discussed that the Papal States, pretty much the whole middle section of the Italian peninsula, in the Papal States, the Pope was the literal king, presiding over not just a criminal child rape concealment enterprise and a few acres of churches and museums like today, but governing trade, commerce, agriculture, taxation, etc., of hundreds of thousands of regular people, as kings do. Now that I've set the scene, picture, if you will, the humble but hopeful Mortara family of Bologna, a perfectly fine city within the arcane Papal States. While the Jewish Mortara family was by no means rich, they were well off enough to hire a nanny and housekeeper to help with their 8 children.
That's good.
Yeah, so far so good, right? Now, I know 1858 doesn't seem like the modern age to us now, but if you were a Western European Jew, it was a modern, almost golden age. The fruits of post-Enlightenment Europe, early democratic movements, and other liberalizing forces had begun to make life for the Jewish populations of most countries bearable.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
It all worked out.
And nothing bad happened to Jews ever again.
Straight line to now. In larger urban areas, Jews were becoming more and more seen as normal, even valued parts of cultural and commercial life. Things would get, as you mentioned, much worse later, but we'll leave that for another time. So, despite the improvement in the lives of the average Jew, there were still anti-Jewish laws in the regressive Papal States. One of which was Jewish families could not have Christian servants.
Oh,
right? Christians could not do menial tasks for Jews.
No. That would be disgusting.
Terrible. But many observant Jewish families had one, so life in the house could carry on during the Sabbath. Listeners in Brooklyn will know these people as Shabbos goys.
Right.
Someone who can turn on a light or go out shopping or use the oven, et cetera, on the Sabbath, right?
It's helpful to have one around.
We're goys come in handy once in a while. So
Goys will be goys.
and truth be told, apparently the law was not strictly enforced in the Papal States. So they allowed the Jews to kind of let it slide. So the Mortara family hired a nanny called Anna Nina Morisi. And Anna Nina Morisi was a poor rural girl to help out around the house.
Sure.
She was desperate to save money for a dowry so she could get married because that was a thing.
Yeah, you got to have some good money if you want to.
You got to pay a guy to marry you.
You want to pull in some of that sweet action.
So it turns out the Mortaras were remarkably kind-hearted people for the time and the place, because when Morisi, the nanny, got pregnant out of wedlock, the Mortaras kept her in their employ when the typical custom would have been to fire her on the spot. But because it was Catholic country in the Papal States and shamey, they paid her for the last 4 months of her pregnancy to go live elsewhere, carry the baby to term, and then, of course, give it up to an orphanage, as very much required by law in the Papal States.
Right. That is generous, though, of them.
It is generous, and then they brought her back to work like nothing had happened, right? So
It's more generous than our current set of laws regarding maternity.
yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
And the nanny Morisi would end up repaying this kindness with what became an internationally infamous act of what was probably unintentional cruelty. And it was this. Sometime in his infancy, little Edgardo, the sixth of the Mortara children, became sick. Worried not just about his mortal life, but his unsaved Jewish soul, the illiterate and deeply superstitious Morisi confided in the neighborhood grocer, a guy called Caesar Lepori, of her concerns. He apparently told her she could secretly baptize the child, and should he die, he would, like all dogs, go to heaven.
That's nice.
So Morisi, mind you, not an ordained priest, and most importantly, a woman,
Right.
secretly baptized Edgardo.
Oh, so she did it. She didn't sneak him off to a priest.
No.
She just sprinkled some water on his face.
Just moistened his forehead.
Precisely right. She secretly baptized Edgardo without the consent of his parents,
Yeah.
who were also her employers and her benefactors. So, luckily, little Edgardo survived whatever malady befell him, and recall, at the time, most of the world was decidedly anti-vax.
Yes.
So, and life in the Mortara household went on as normal, but not for long, dear uncles.
Uh-oh.
A few years later, an official of both church and state, the Inquisitor of Bologna, a guy named Father Folletti, was sniffing around for someone to accuse of something and persecute for anything, as inquisitors do.
Inquisitors got to inquisit.
Exactly right. When he heard rumor of a Jewish child being baptized a Catholic somewhere in the city, So I can't help but imagine this guy as the freaky fucking child catcher from Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. Remember that fucking guy?
I don't, but I have other friends who do, who are terrified of him.
I'm still terrified of him. He was a nightmare. So Folletti the Inquisitor goes sniffing around, and before long, he traces the rumor to Morisi the nanny. She admitted to sprinkling water on the child's head, and though once again she was a woman, she was not an ordained priest, and it was not holy water. She told him, I baptize you in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Ghost. And boom, the baby was legally a Catholic as far as the Inquisitor was concerned.
Okay.
Rules are rules. It's not. Don't hate the player.
Don't hate the Inquisitor. So just a year or two prior, the last Pope who gives a fuck, reaffirmed that it was against church doctrine to allow a Catholic child to be raised by non-Catholics.
Oh, my God.
Even if the people raising it were its own biological parents, and even if they had no idea their minor dependent child was technically and legally a Catholic.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Taking a ceremony done out of their control without their permission.
Right. So,
too bad you got a Catholic one.
Folletti the Inquisitor, always the officious clerk, wrote to Rome asking permission to legally kidnap the 6-year-old child. And I think around 6 is like when you start to get attached, right?
Yeah,
To your kid. Prior to that, it's like, whatever. But so naturally permission was granted. 2 civil policemen went to the family house and explain to them what was about to happen.
Oh, my God.
This was the first time the Mortaras had heard anything of it, and they instantly fell into a state of shock and panic, of course.
Yeah.
Mrs. Mortara threw herself over Edgardo in his bed and said they would have to kill her before they could take the child. An uncle was dispatched to the Inquisitor, ran and found him, and begged for an explanation, to which Folletti kindly responded, "It's confidential." You don't even, it's on a need-to-know basis.
That's right.
And clearly you don't need to know.
We'd explain it to you gladly if you were a Christian, but unfortunately...
So the kindly Inquisitor Folletti did, however, accede to one request. He granted the family one more day with the 6-year-old child that they would probably never see again.
Oh, my God.
How kind.
Because as we know, Catholicism is based on mercy.
Right.
So, long story short, the ecclesiastically legal and publicly legal kidnapping occurred. The bewildered child was taken off to live with, in the worst possible scenario for daycare options, Catholic priests in a monastery. Even the police involved said it was a disgrace and the worst thing they had ever had to do. But since the church was the state, they were powerless. So
now they're all, not only are they fathers, but they're dads.
They're dads. So it's this crazy sitcom about my 40 dads.
Right. Monks raising a baby.
Well, soon I'll tell you about the one dad he had. So remember how I said this period was a newly semi-liberating time for the Jews of Europe?
You did say that.
Part of that liberation was a newfound voice as entire communities of Jews in various countries, which a lot of them had newspapers. They had some political pull. So Jewish newspapers broadcast this outrage across Europe and the UK. It found its way to broad publication in the pretty seriously anti-Catholic United States. And then non-Jewish mainstream papers all across the world began to run with the story in kind of a serialized form, claiming that Pope Pius IX himself had personally directed the kidnapping. A detail that, while not technically provable, was made to smell true because the boy was soon spending his days playing and hanging out with the Holy Father, who tried to convince the traumatized child he was his true father.
No.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So, little aside for our papal party animals out there, Pope Pius IX is now a saint whose feast day is February 7th.
Oh.
That's this week, bitches.
And we all celebrate by kidnapping a
Kidnap
Jew.
a little Jewish kid. It's the law. We don't like it either.
Look, it's just what we do. It's part of our religion. You can't persecute us for it.
That's right. So he was also the longest serving pope ever.
Oh.
And the first pope to be photographed, which should tell you a little bit about this papacy and its clumsy intersection with the modern age.
Yeah.
Well, that's crazy.
That's a fun one. Did they get a picture of him with the kid?
No, oddly enough. Because as we all know, Jews cannot be photographed.
Right.
They don't show up on film. And actually, the Pope looks a little bit like late stage Shatner. So just to paint a picture for you. So anyway, the Catholic newspapers across the world punched back, but their claims strained the limits of the plausible to a world weary of a millennium of Catholic bombast and excesses. They claimed he was some kind of divine infant, taking to the unfamiliar scriptures like a fish to water, drawn to images of the Holy Mother Mary, to which I would say he was just snatched from his own mother. You hardly need a miracle to understand his affinity for maternal imagery. So, Uncle Dan, you may or may not know that in our young lives, Uncle Doug and I were involved in a brutal custody battle, not over us, but over some very close relatives. As both families were comprised of terrible people, the fight started awful and got exponentially worse. Accusations of the most slanderous and salacious kind flew back and forth for years, devastating everyone involved.
Is this true, Doug?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's truly true.
It's true.
So reading about this international drama sounded very much like that, these back and forths in the newspapers, except in this case, one party was 100% totally in the right, the Mortara family.
Right.
So Pope Pius IX, who you'll be surprised to learn about a pope, seems like a detached, pompous asshole, was outraged by the outrage and doubled down on his determination to keep this child and mold him into a priest who would convert Europe's Jewish population, a secret weapon against the cursed Jews.
From their own ranks.
But it turns out Pope Pius was very dependent on the support of Catholic monarchs, most especially a guy called Napoleon III of France. The Pope no longer had any army to speak of, which he used to have, and the Papal States lived off of ever-increasing foreign debt, so Napoleon III's money and army kept the absurd little kingdom afloat and alive. And even in heavily Catholic France, the story infuriated the populace. Several prominent figures in the European Jewish community, including the vastly powerful Rothschild family, to whom the Pope was deeply in debt as well, tried to intervene to get Edgardo returned. The Pope, refusing to smell the rage on the wind buffeting his increasingly not-so-windproof little kingdom, refused to budge. In fact, and you'll love this, he whined to a Jewish delegation that came to visit him about Edgardo that everybody was crying for the family, but nobody was crying for him, because he was entitled to feel like the boy's father, too.
This feels very Trumpian.
It's totally Trumpian.
In its nature.
I'm telling you, it's fake news.
Where was the sympathy
happy.
for him?
Right.
The kidnapper.
Yeah.
Everybody's all mad at the hurricane, and nobody's upset about how sad it was that I had to go and talk to those dirty people after it.
I threw my shoulder out throwing paper towels at those Puerto Ricans. So.
Yeah.
So, of course, it is the universal truth of it, dear uncles. Across the centuries, the one thing that binds all religious bullies, fanatics, and oppressors together is that they're always the victim.
Yeah.
So, while the oblivious Pope was busy playing with his stolen boy and grooming him to be a great ex-Jewish crusader, Napoleon III made a deal with the Kingdom of Sardinia to drive the occupying Austrians out of the rest of Italy, dismantle the Papal States, and unify all of Italy. He just could no longer justify military and financial support for this idiot Pope and the firestorm he was causing. So, within months, the Papal States were reduced to a sliver of their former selves, essentially the city of Rome. The people of Bologna had declared their freedom from pontifical rule, and their first new order of business was to declare religious freedom and equality of all citizens, and officially outlaw the now 600-year-old Inquisition.
Oh.
And arrest the Inquisitor, Father Faletti.
Oh, excellent.
Wow.
So there's a ton more to the story. Huge investigation by the police of newly free Bologna, the trial of the Inquisitor, another kidnapped Jewish child sent from Rome, sent to live with the same thick-skulled Pope, etc., etc. But the real meat of this tale is how the once unquestionable, infallible Pope, not even imagining he was capable of overreaching, suddenly found himself in a new age where he did indeed overreach, and in so doing lost his kingdom and accidentally unified Italy.
Wow.
So
can I just point out, you mentioned this infallibility thing. I Googled Pope Pious
Yes.
Just as you were talking, and the first thing it says is that, or one of the first things that it says, is that he was the one who convened the First Vatican Council, which was where papal infallibility was established.
was codified into canon law.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he was the one that declared popes infallible.
A little Trumpian.
And then got pretty fucking fallible.
Yeah, a little Trumpian, and then he lost the kingdom.
He fouled.
He fouled. So on a melancholy note, sadly, Edgardo remained behind the walls of the monastery. His family was allowed to see him once in a while under very tightly controlled circumstances. He remained a priest until his death in 1940.
Oh, wow.
Though Pope Pius's dream of Edgardo converting all of Europe's Jews seems not to have come to fruition yet.
Well, it seems like right after 1940, if he had just waited a few more years, there would have been a lot less work for him to do.
Whoa. Cody, you know what to do. So anyway, to conclude, there's a really excellent book on this situation by David Ketzer called The Kidnapping of Edgardo Mortara. Brilliant name. For anyone interested in a deeper dive on this crazy story, I thought that was it as far as any reference to this obscure but historically seismic event. But no. A young upstart filmmaker by name of Steven Spielberg is in pre-production on a big-budget movie adaptation of this.
Nice.
Oh, no kidding.
There you go.
So out of obscurity it shall soon be.
Thanks to us.
Yes.
I'm going to take full
You
credit.
heard it here first.
You're welcome, Steven. So let's see if Spielberg can, for once, get through a strong moralistic narrative without needing to tack on 14 separate endings.
Right.
Somehow I doubt it. So anyway,
Look for Eric Bana to be playing Pope Pius. Then
actually, I think Eric Bana is playing Edgardo.
I knew it would be Bana. Is he really? Is he? It seems like
It's a 6-year-old child.
It's Andy Serkis.
I feel like he could do it. I feel he's a good.
It's Andy Serkis.
But, Father, I don't want to go with them.
All right. That's probably enough of that.
Yeah, okay.
Hey, Pope, stop kidnapping children, motherfucker.
Oh, like that's going to happen. But anyway, we'll move on.
All right.